My clueless parents thought my sister was the responsible one while I got humiliated for every tiny mistake. When mom sneered, "Why can't you be more like her?" I snapped and left home. 2 months later, she got fired for stealing from work and they begged me to come back. I've been the black sheep in my family for as long as I can remember. My older sister, Jess, has always been the golden child, the responsible one, and I've been the one who could never seem to get anything right. It's been years of constant comparison, criticism, and feeling like a failure. But after a huge blow-up with my parents where I finally snapped, I left home to get some space. 2 months later, my sister got fired from her job for stealing, and now my parents are begging me to come back. Growing up, I always felt like I could never do anything right. My older sister, Jess, was always the perfect one. She was smart, confident, and always had everything together. Whether it was school or social life, Jess excelled in ways I could never match. My parents would always praise her in front of me, never realizing how it made me feel invisible. It wasn't like I wasn't trying. I worked hard in school, tried to make friends, and even got a job early on to help out at home. But it never seemed like enough. I remember one afternoon, after I came home with an A on an exam, my mom barely looked up from her magazine when I told her. "Good job," she said in passing. But when Jess came home with an A+ on her test, it was a celebration. "Look at Jess. She's always so on top of things," my mom gushed, ruffling Jess's hair. Meanwhile, I stood in the background, feeling like an afterthought. My dad didn't help either. He was quieter, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes whenever I made a mistake, whether it was a small slip-up at work or an argument with a friend. It was exhausting. I felt like no matter what I did, it wasn't enough. My parents would always say, "Why can't you be more like Jess?" It didn't matter if I had a rough day or if something didn't go right in my life, that was always the standard. And Jess, for her part, never noticed how much it hurt me. She was wrapped up in her own world, too busy being perfect to see the cracks forming in mine. By the time I was 18, I had stopped trying to meet their expectations. Jess had already gone off to a prestigious university, while I decided to attend a local community college. I didn't have the heart to leave home, and honestly, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. My parents weren't thrilled. They kept making comments like, "You could do better, Claire. You don't have to settle for this." And those words stung. I didn't want to settle, but it felt like they had already decided what my life should look like without ever asking me what I wanted. When I graduated, I started working at a coffee shop, just trying to make ends meet while I figured out my next step. I was still living at home, and my parents would frequently tell me how disappointed they were that I hadn't figured it out by then. Jess had already secured a well-paying internship, while I was still working part-time. Every time I mentioned my job, my mom would sigh and say, "Why can't you be more like Jess? She's already on the path to something great." It didn't help that Jess was also more mature than me, at least according to my parents. She had her life together, while I was still trying to find myself. I tried to stand up for myself, tried to show my parents that I was doing the best I could, but it felt like I was talking to a wall. Every little mistake I made was criticized, while Jess could do no wrong. The breaking point came one evening when I was sitting at the dinner table. I had just come back from work, feeling exhausted but hopeful that maybe this time, things would be different. I had been working extra hours and trying to save up for an apartment. I thought that if I showed my parents that I was trying, maybe they would stop comparing me to Jess. But no. "Claire," my mom started, her voice cool as usual. "We've been talking, and we're really concerned about you." I froze, knowing exactly where this was going. My dad didn't say anything, just looked at me with that same disappointed expression. "Concerned?" I repeated, barely able to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "I'm doing fine. I've been working hard, going to school, and why can't you be more like Jess?" My mom's voice cut through me like a knife. "She's on track to graduate with honors, she's already getting job offers, and you just don't seem to care about your future. You need to do better." That was it. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I stood up from the table, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. You know what? I'm done with this, I said, my voice shaking with frustration. I can't keep living in Jess's shadow. I'm not her, and I never will be. I'm just not enough for you, and I can't take it anymore. My mom's face twisted with frustration, and my dad didn't even look up. What's wrong with you, Claire? My mom asked. Why can't you just try harder? Because I'm not Jess, I shouted, before grabbing my things and storming out of the house. I didn't even look back. I drove around for hours, not knowing where I was going. I couldn't go back to that house, not after everything. Not after I finally exploded in a way I couldn't take back. I found a small apartment near the coffee shop I worked at and decided that this was where I was going to stay for the time being. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of freedom. But even though I was free from the constant comparisons, it didn't come without its own set of challenges. I had to adjust to being on my own, paying rent, figuring out bills, and still trying to figure out who I was. I didn't have the perfect plan, but I was finally in control of my own life. 2 months passed, and I started to feel like I was getting my footing. I made friends at work, started focusing more on school, and even managed to pick up a few freelance gigs. I wasn't rich, but I was surviving. I was learning to be independent, and for the first time, I wasn't trying to live up to anyone's expectations but my own. Then one day, I got a call from my mom. Her voice was shaky, and I could tell something was wrong. Claire, she started, her voice barely above a whisper, I need you to come home. It's Jess, she's been fired. I felt my stomach drop. Jess? Fired? That didn't make any sense. Jess had always been so careful, so responsible. Fired? What happened? I asked, trying to make sense of what she was saying. She was caught stealing from her job, my mom said, her voice filled with disbelief. We don't know what to do. Claire, you're the only one who can help. I couldn't believe it. Jess, the golden child, the one who had everything together, had done something like that? I didn't know what to say, but my mom kept pushing. Please, Claire, we need you, she begged. Come back. We don't know how to handle this without you. I sat in silence for a moment, trying to process everything. I had spent so many years feeling inadequate, and now my sister, the one everyone thought was perfect, was the one who had fallen from grace. It was almost poetic in a way, but it didn't feel good. I'm sorry, Mom, but I can't just drop everything and come back, I said, my voice firm. You didn't listen to me when I needed you. You never saw me for who I was. You always put Jess first. I'm not coming back to fix your problems. And with that, I hung up. I didn't know if I had made the right choice, but I felt like I had no other option. I needed to keep moving forward, and I couldn't go back to being the person they wanted me to be. 2 weeks passed, and things were a whirlwind. I didn't reach out to my parents again. I wasn't sure what to say, and I wasn't ready to let go of the sense of independence I had fought so hard to build. Jess's firing had made waves, and the tension in my family was palpable. My mom would occasionally send me texts asking how I was, but I ignored them. I was so tired of being the person who was always there to fix things for them, while they never seemed to see me unless they needed something. The rumors about Jess stealing started to spread, and I couldn't help but feel this strange mixture of relief and guilt. Relief, because it felt like the weight had finally shifted, Jess was no longer the perfect, untouchable sister, and for once, the narrative wasn't about her. But guilt, because no matter how much I had suffered under the weight of comparison, I didn't want to see my sister go through something like this. I continued with my routine, working, studying, taking small steps toward a life that was finally mine. It wasn't glamorous, but I was learning to appreciate the small victories. I didn't need anyone's approval anymore. Then, one night, 2 weeks after I hung up on my mom, I got another call. It was late, and I almost didn't answer, but something told me that I should. Claire, please, my mom said, her voice shaky. I'm sorry for everything. We didn't understand what we were doing to you. But now, we need you. I leaned against the kitchen counter, my heart pounding in my chest. I had been preparing myself for this moment, but hearing her like that, it broke something inside me. For the first time in a long time, I felt the rawness of the situation. My mom wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't trying to make me feel inferior or like I was the problem. She was desperate, and that made all the difference. Why now? I asked, trying to keep the emotion from seeping into my voice. Why didn't you see this before? Why didn't you see me? Because we were too wrapped up in Jess, my mom admitted, her voice barely audible. We thought she was the answer to everything. But now, we see how wrong we were. We took you for granted. I took you for granted. I'm sorry. We need you back, Claire. Please come home. There was a long silence. I could hear my mom's breathing, and I knew she was waiting for me to say something, anything. My emotions were all over the place. Part of me wanted to scream at her for all the years of hurt, all the times I had felt like I wasn't good enough. But another part of me just wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something different. Jess needs help, my mom continued. She's not handling this well. She's really struggling, and your dad and we don't know what to do. We thought maybe you could help. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. I didn't want to be the one to fix things. I didn't want to be the one who was always expected to be the savior, the person who had to hold everything together. But I knew this was a crossroads. I could choose to stay away, to keep my distance and focus on myself. Or I could go back and try to fix the pieces of the broken family I had left behind. Let me think about it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The line went quiet for a moment. Okay, my mom replied. Take all the time you need. But please know that we're sorry, Claire. We really are. I hung up the phone and sat in the kitchen, staring at nothing. My mind was spinning, torn between anger and sympathy, hurt and understanding. I didn't know what the right choice was anymore. Could I go back to the house that had never felt like home? Could I really forgive them for all the times they had compared me to Jess, for all the times they had made me feel like I was never enough? The next day, I decided to visit my parents. I didn't know what else to do, and I knew if I didn't go, I would regret it. But I was also determined to make it clear that I wasn't coming back to be their emotional crutch. I was coming back for me, to see if we could finally begin to rebuild something that had been broken for so long. I pulled up to their house, and my heart dropped when I saw Jess's car in the driveway. It felt like I was stepping into a different world, a world where everything was still messy, still full of old wounds. My parents were outside when I approached the door, standing together with their backs to me. When they heard my footsteps, they turned around, and for the first time, I saw my dad with tears in his eyes. Claire, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We're so sorry. I stood there for a moment, taking in their faces. My mom looked older, worn down by the stress of everything, and Jess looked smaller than I remembered. She wasn't the confident, untouchable person I had grown up with. She looked like someone who had just realized the weight of her own mistakes, and it was a look I didn't know how to process. I didn't know what to say. I had come here with the intention of staying strong, of not letting them manipulate me into being the one to fix everything. But seeing them like this, vulnerable, apologetic, it caught me off guard. Why did it take this long? I asked, my voice shaky. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Why did I have to leave for you to see what was right in front of you? My mom reached out, her hands trembling as she spoke. We didn't know how to see it, Claire. We were too focused on Jess. We didn't see how much we were hurting you until it was too late. I'm sorry. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to be angry, but it felt like that would only drag me down. Part of me just wanted to say goodbye and leave them all behind. But then I saw Jess, standing silently off to the side, her eyes filled with shame. I know I've messed up, she said, her voice quiet. I don't know how to fix it, but I'm sorry, Claire. I nodded slowly, unsure of how to take her apology. We had never been close, and I had never seen her as the perfect sister that everyone else did. But maybe it was time to stop seeing her as a rival, as someone I had to compete with for my parents' attention. I don't know if things will ever be the way they were, I said, finally speaking my truth. But I'm here now. And we have to figure this out. All of us. My mom and dad exchanged a look, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw something like hope in their eyes. Maybe this wasn't the end of everything after all. Maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something new. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. It felt surreal, coming back to this house, where I had spent so many years of my life feeling invisible. But it was also clear that nothing was the same anymore. Jess wasn't the golden child anymore, and my parents were trying, really trying, to make things right, though it wasn't easy. The tension was thick, and there were moments of silence that felt unbearable, but I wasn't ready to give up. I owed it to myself to at least try, even if it meant dealing with all the leftover bitterness that had been building up over the years. Jess, for the first time in a long time, seemed fragile. I wasn't used to seeing her this way. She was the one who had always been on top, always the one who could do no wrong. But now, standing there with her downcast eyes and her shoulders hunched, I realized just how much had been going on behind closed doors that I hadn't known about. She had always been the perfect image of confidence, but under that surface was someone who was struggling in ways I couldn't have imagined. One evening, after dinner, I found myself sitting in the living room with Jess. The rest of the family was busy, and we were alone. The silence was heavy, but I didn't want to be the first to break it. I wasn't sure what to say to her. It had been years since we had any real conversation, and I wasn't sure how to even start. Finally, she spoke up. "I know I messed up," Jess said softly, her voice barely audible. "I never thought I'd end up like this. I thought I was doing everything right. I thought I was better than you. I thought if I kept being perfect, you and Mom and Dad would see me as enough. I didn't even realize I was hurting you." I could feel the sting of her words. It wasn't just the apology that hurt, but the realization that she had seen me as competition all along. Jess had always been the one I could never measure up to, and to hear that she had been struggling with her own feelings of inadequacy made me feel a strange sense of relief. Maybe we weren't so different after all. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked, my voice trembling. I was always the one trying to get their attention, trying to prove I was good enough. "You were always so perfect. You never needed to try, at least not in the way I did. You didn't see how much it hurt." "I didn't know how," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't know how to tell you that I felt like I was always doing things for the wrong reasons. I didn't realize how much I was pushing you down to keep myself up." I sat in silence, processing her words. It was hard to reconcile the image of Jess I had carried with this version of her, someone who wasn't so different from me, someone who had been struggling in ways I had never seen. At that moment, I realized that we had both been living in a warped version of reality for so long, unable to truly connect with each other because we were too busy trying to compete for our parents' love. "I don't know what to say," I finally replied, my voice cracking. "I've spent so many years feeling like I wasn't good enough, and now you're telling me you've been struggling, too. I just. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if I can." "I don't know either," Jess admitted. "But I want to try. I don't want to be the person who keeps pushing you away. I don't want to keep pretending that I have everything figured out." For a moment, we sat there, both of us lost in our own thoughts. It felt like a heavy weight had shifted, but it also felt like we were standing at the edge of something that could either break us or bring us closer together. In the days that followed, things didn't magically improve. Jess was still struggling with her firing, and my parents were still dealing with the fallout. But there was a subtle shift in the dynamic. Jess started reaching out more, talking to me, trying to find common ground. It was awkward at first, but it was a start. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a constant failure. I wasn't just the person who had to be there for everyone else. I was allowed to exist as I was, imperfect and still figuring things out. One night, after a long day of helping Jess with her resume, we sat in the kitchen, sipping on some cheap wine. My mom and dad were upstairs, talking about what to do next, and the house was quieter than usual. Jess broke the silence. "I don't want to go back to that job," she said, her voice low. "I know I messed up, and I know I'm going to have to deal with the consequences. But I don't think I can ever go back to being that person who was always pretending. I just want to figure out who I really am, you know?" I nodded, understanding what she meant. I had spent so many years trying to be someone I wasn't, trying to be the perfect daughter who could live up to their expectations. But now, I was starting to see that it was okay not to have it all figured out. It was okay to be lost sometimes, as long as you were willing to find your way. "Maybe we can both figure it out," I said, looking over at Jess. "Maybe we can stop trying to be someone we're not, and just be ourselves." Jess smiled, a small, genuine smile that I hadn't seen in years. "Yeah, maybe we can." As the days passed, the tension in the house began to lift. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments where old wounds would resurface, but we were trying. My parents were still apologizing, trying to make amends for everything they had done, and I was starting to believe them. Maybe they hadn't known how much they had hurt me, but they were making an effort now, and that meant something. I wasn't sure what the future held for me, for Jess, or for my family. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a chance to be something more than just a shadow of someone else. I wasn't Jess, and I never would be. But I didn't need to be. I was finally starting to accept that I was enough, just as I was. A few more weeks passed, and life slowly began to stabilize. Jess was still struggling with the fallout from her job and her actions, but there was a change in her. It wasn't just about facing the consequences of her mistake anymore, it was about understanding why she had made those decisions in the first place. We started having honest conversations, and she began to open up more. I could see the regret in her eyes, but also the desire to move forward and find her own path. Our parents were trying harder too. It wasn't perfect, but we were all trying. There were moments of awkwardness, of course, and I couldn't completely forget all the years I spent feeling overlooked and undervalued. But I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. I wasn't rushing to get their approval anymore. I was figuring out my own life, and that was enough. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I was sitting in my small apartment, scrolling through emails. My phone rang, and I saw that it was from my old workplace, the coffee shop I had worked at for years. I'd been away from the job for a while since I had taken the time to focus on school and get away from my old life. It had been a solid job, a safe job. I answered the call, curious as to why they were reaching out. "Claire, hey." It was Sam, the manager I'd worked with. "I hope you're doing well. I've got something I need to talk to you about." "Hey, Sam," I said, surprised. "What's going on?" Actually, Sam hesitated. "This might be a little awkward, but we've had a situation with Jess." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" "We found out she's been applying for jobs under false pretenses, using some of the references she gave us from our company," Sam said. "We've already contacted the company's legal team about it." I froze. Jess had been applying for other jobs while still trying to work through her mistakes, but this was worse than I thought. She had used references from the coffee shop I had once worked at? It was a blatant violation of trust. Sam continued speaking, but I was already thinking through the implications. This wasn't just a minor mistake anymore. If Jess kept going down this path, she could get into serious trouble. And knowing her, knowing how much she had built her entire identity on being perfect, I knew this would be a huge blow to her. I wasn't sure if I should intervene, but I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't about to let her drag me back into her mistakes, especially after everything that had happened. I needed to make a choice about where I stood. And I wasn't about to let my family fall into the same trap of sweeping things under the rug like they always had. I called my parents that evening and told them what I had learned. They were shocked, as I knew they would be. It was clear that they didn't want to believe that Jess could be involved in something like this, but they needed to hear it. Jess needed to face the consequences of her actions. They didn't want to admit it at first, but I could tell they were starting to understand that their blind favoritism had created an environment where Jess could think she was above the law. "Claire, please, help her," my mom said. "She doesn't know what she's doing. We need to fix this before it gets any worse." I wanted to scream at them. Fix this? They had spent years ignoring me, making me feel like I was the one who needed to be fixed. Now they wanted to patch things up with Jess and act like everything was okay? I wasn't the one who needed to fix anything this time. "I'm not fixing this, Mom," I said firmly. "She has to face the consequences of her actions. You can't just keep saving her every time she messes up. You've been doing that for years, and look where it's gotten us." My dad was quiet on the other end of the line, but I could feel the weight of my words. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me into being the one to clean up Jess's mess. I wasn't going to be their scapegoat anymore. "I can't make things right for her," I continued. "She needs to do that on her own." There was silence, and for a long moment, I thought maybe I had lost them. But then my dad finally spoke. "You're right, Claire. We've been wrong. We can't fix everything, and we can't keep enabling her. We've been blind." I ended the conversation and felt a sense of finality that I hadn't felt before. It was as if the door to my old life had closed, and I was standing on the other side, ready to walk into something new. The next few days were tough. Jess tried to reach out to me, but I kept my distance. She had tried to shield herself from facing the truth for so long, and I knew that this time, she couldn't hide behind my parents' excuses. It was her responsibility to own up to what she had done. Finally, Jess came to me. She showed up at my apartment, standing at my door, looking tired and broken. The usual pride she wore so easily was gone. She looked small, unsure, and vulnerable. "I messed up, Claire," she said, her voice shaky. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've hurt everyone. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need to make it right. I need to fix this, but I don't know how." I looked at her for a long time before I spoke. "You start by owning up to it. No more hiding behind excuses. No more pretending you're perfect." "I'm not perfect," she whispered. "I've never been. And I think I've been trying so hard to be someone else that I've lost who I really am." For the first time in years, I felt a sense of hope for Jess. She wasn't trying to make excuses anymore. She was trying to face the music, to take responsibility. And that was a start. "I'll help you," I said, surprising even myself. "But you have to do the work. You have to fix it. And I'm not going to be the one to save you this time." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes, but there was a look of determination in her face. "I will. I promise." As for my parents, they came to realize the full extent of what had happened. They understood now that Jess's actions weren't just some minor mistake, they were the culmination of years of enabling. They saw that they couldn't fix everything, and they couldn't protect her from the consequences. They apologized, but I didn't need them to. What I needed was for them to finally see me. And they did. For the first time, they truly saw me. Things weren't perfect. Jess had to deal with the consequences of her actions, and that was hard for all of us. But I had learned something crucial in all of this. I didn't have to be the one to fix everyone else. I didn't have to be the one who carried all their weight. I was allowed to live my life, make mistakes, and learn from them. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming my own sense of self-worth. I walked away from my family knowing that I had done the right thing. I didn't have to save them anymore. They had to save themselves, just as I had saved myself. And that was the most satisfying feeling of all.